out after the guests had left.
She trusted him implicitly. She probably just went to bed every night at 9 o'clock. He would come home from his doings, wash his blood-stained overalls, go to bed, end of story.
The police accepted her statement and moved on to other suspects. Peter Sutcliffe continued to kill.
We know now from evidence that he was predominantly a sexual killer. He was going out because murdering these women gave him sexual thrills. When he knelt over them and stabbed them, he could also masturbate himself at the same time.
By the end of 1978, he had killed 9 women, and even with a team of investigators working around the clock, they were no closer to finding out his identity. Descriptions of the killer varied wildly.
By now, the police were getting desperate because people were saying, well, there have been all these killings, why can't they do something about it?
Sutcliffe himself would soon give the police the break they needed. But would the investigative team, now called the Ripper Squad, be able to recognize this invisible man for what he truly was? In early 1979, police were searching Yorkshire, England for a serial killer who had murdered 9 women. Despite the efforts of police, the Yorkshire Ripper was still stalking women in the area's red light district.
The fact that he snuck up on his victims and attacked them suggests that they were rather distant objects to him.
The police were under public pressure to stop the brutal crimes. They interviewed 175,000 people, took 12,500 statements, checked 10,000 vehicles. Nothing panned out.
The police wanted him caught, the public wanted him caught. The majority of the resources at the time were directed towards capturing the Yorkshire Ripper.
When investigators spotted Peter Sutcliffe's car in the red light district on several occasions, the police unit known as the Ripper Squad ran his plate number and found his address. On July 29, 1979, Andrew Lapchew went to question him.
Something dodgy about him, something just not quite right. Peter Sutcliffe's eyes were like a shark's eyes, dead. They didn't mirror the soul, if you like. There was nothing there.
Lapchew thought that he had the right man. A £5 note found on one of the victims had been traced to Sutcliffe's employer, and his boots matched the prints found at 2 of the crime scenes. But then the focus of the investigation was diverted by a hoax. When the Ripper Squad received a tape from a man claiming to be the Ripper. On June 26, 1979, detectives played it for the media.
I'm Jack. I say you are still having no luck catching me. I bet you've warned them, but they never listen.
The man's accent, known as Geordie, indicated that he was from an area north of Yorkshire.
There's no question that it made the whole investigation take an immediate right turn. And this, of course, eliminated any suspects who might come from Yorkshire. Guess what? That would include Peter Sutcliffe.
The Yorkshire Ripper had eluded police once again. Through 1979 and early 1980, Peter Sutcliffe claimed 3 more lives: Josephine Whitaker, Barbara Leach, Marguerite Walls. The Ripper had now killed a dozen women.
There was a great shadow over the county. I could only describe it as a gothic gloom. Women especially were terrified because in the shadows they imagined that this murder was lurking.
On November 17, 1980, Peter Sutcliffe spotted Jacqueline Hill, a 20-year-old student walking home from class near Leeds University.
I was again in a world of my own.
He smashed her on the skull with a hammer and dragged her into the shadows. Ducking down to avoid the glare of headlights, he stabbed her repeatedly. Her eyes remained open throughout.
She seemed to be looking at me with an accusing stare. This shook me up a bit. I left her lying on her back. I think she was dead.
When news of Jacqueline Hill's murder hit the papers, it seemed to many that even with all the resources the Ripper Squad had at their disposal, the killer would never be caught. He had eluded police for too long. He had killed too many women. The biggest manhunt in British history had failed to find him.
They seemed to be showing no signs of catching him at all. He seemed to be one step ahead of the police at all times.
However, Peter Sutcliffe's career of violence was beginning to take its toll.
His life with Sonia, to some extent, was falling apart because he'd been arrested for drink driving, and so he knew he was going to lose his job. So Sutcliffe must have been in some degree of turmoil, and that's when he began making mistakes.
In January of 1981, Sutcliffe cruised Sheffield streets looking for his next victim. He picked up a prostitute and pulled his car into the driveway of a large house.
It was known that men took prostitutes there. Sutcliffe parked his car in such a way that he could get a fast getaway.
Sergeant Bob Ring and his partner noticed this suspicious behavior. When the car's registration didn't match the plate number, they took Sutcliffe into custody for questioning.
He has the sense to say, oh, let me go behind that tree to relieve myself, and was clever enough to take his implements of death with him and hide them.
The sergeant remembered hearing a noise. That was significant, just hearing a noise at that stage.
When asked about his whereabouts on the nights of other Ripper murders, he gave a series of alibis. But Sergeant Ring thought that Sutcliffe was acting a little too cool and calm, and he went back to the scene of the arrest to see what he could find.
The sergeant went back and searched and found a hammer and a knife.
Ring returned to the station house, evidence in hand. Sutcliffe now knew that his murderous spree had come to an end. He said, "I think you've been leading up to it." Leading up to what? Asked the police officer. Well, about the Yorkshire Ripper. It's me. January 2nd, 1981. Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, had been arrested. He had begun to confess his brutal crimes.
I, Peter Sutcliffe, wish to make a statement, and I want someone to write down what I say.
He told the police whom he had killed and how. Investigators also learned that the Ripper had masturbated over many of his victims.
Peter Sutcliffe's motive was sex, and I think by murdering these very unfortunate women, I think that's how he received sexual gratification.
Sutcliffe's clothing gave an indication of his sexual intent.
He was given a change of clothing, and of course, as his clothing was removed, they discovered this sweater, this V-neck sweater, which was used like a pair of trousers, with the V of the neck exposing his genitalia.
The police wasted no time getting the word out. They finally had a suspect in the Ripper case.
We're absolutely delighted with developments at this stage. Absolutely delighted.
Sutcliffe's family was shocked to learn that he was the Yorkshire Ripper.
And as I walked in, one of them said, well, this could be a relation of John's. And then another one said, have you a brother called Peter? I said, no, I've got a son called Peter. Does he live at Eton? I said, yes, he does. Whereupon one of the chaps passed the morning paper across with a picture of his house on the front page and his name and address printed in the column below. And I just said, oh, my God. And I said, Eddie,